Good morning. Thank you so much for coming along. I'll give it a minute whilst we wait for a few other people to join. Yeah, my name is Jodie. I'm running the session. I'll go through the agenda before we kick off. A few housekeeping rules there. I think everybody's already sort of on mute already. If you do have any questions at all, we have a chat box and a question box. I'll try my best to come to all of the questions at the end of the session. If we do run out of time, somebody will reach out with answers to your questions. So please do ask anything. And well, it's 10 o'clock, so I'll make a start. So today we're going to focus on some of the newer features that have gone live across the system this year. So we'll start by going through our integration between CashCalc and Analytics. It kind of does a full circle. You can do CashCalc to Analytics back to CashCalc. So I'll show you two of the main sort of use cases and reasons that would be worthwhile using this feature. We're then going to go into a different example client I have, and I've run sessions on all these new features a couple of times before, and I've done it in ways where we've stuck to one storyline and encompassed every feature that's gone live this year, and it feels a bit like we're bouncing around. So I'm trying something different today, and I'm going to pick a feature and focus on that from start to finish, and then we'll come back at the end and have a look at all of the results and how all these different things interact with one another. So the main ones we're going through today: chargeable gains, interest on savings, capital gains, inherited pensions, salary sacrifice, and there is also another one that we couldn't fit in the slide deck that I'm definitely going to show. We've also got the ability to transfer pots, so transfers, and I'm going to look at a pension consolidation case for that particular feature. Okay, so bear with me while I come out of that. There we go. Okay, I'm assuming everybody can still see my screen. The first feature that we're going to focus on, as I say, is the integration that we have between CashCalc and Analytics. There are a couple of different ways that you might use this, so I'll show you two of those. So to start us off with, I'm going to go into my client Otis Smith, and I do have an integration set up with my back office. So if I just go to settings and integrations here, I've got an integration with IntelliFlow set up. It's quite apparent, it's installed, active, ready to go. If you do use IntelliFlow, just a bit of a heads up, the link will sever every 28 days and or if a password is changed on the IntelliFlow side. So if you struggle to use this, you should probably get a pop-up telling you that it needs relinking. All you would do is come to this page, it'll look like that, relink, click that, log into IO, and you're back up and running. We also integrate with other back office systems, Xplan, Timeford, Curo, and there are also some other integrations that you don't see on this page that are one way and activated via that back office in particular. Okay, so that is all set up. If I go back now to Otis and into his information, I'm looking for his pension, which I have, as I say, linked to the back office. So if I click into that and go to actions, I'm able to get a latest valuation, which I'm just going to do now. Little pop-up at the bottom telling me that that's happened and been successful, and I now have access to a couple of features as a result of me having both Analytics and CashCalc licenses. The Analytics and CashCalc integration is slightly different to any of the other integrations we have on the system, where your back office integrations need to be set up. Your Analytics and CashCalc, providing you log in using the same email address, it will just know and automatically integrate. So you don't actually have to set any of that up. But I have my integration all set up and I've just imported the latest valuation. I can now export that portfolio to analytics, generate a medium scan, as well as, if I click into the investment breakdown, access some other key documents such as advisor fact sheets, KID docs, etc., etc. What I'm going to do in this case is export this to analytics, which will take me straight into analytics and my active list. And if I give it a moment, that portfolio will sit in the active list. This is the curse of the demo. Let me just try that again. Okay, seem to be having a bit of an issue with this. I ran it this morning on my practice and everything ran smoothly. But in any case, let's get a portfolio here just so I can complete the circle and explain what sort of happens next. When your portfolio lands on that active list, you'll be able to go in and make some changes. So let's go in and make some changes. Let's add in some Aberdeen funds. Let's go with that one. We'll add that, and let's go with that one. There we go. So I now have my portfolio. I'm going to save that. There we go. Add that to my active list. So now that we have this portfolio here, if I click back into it, I have a couple of additional buttons that didn't exist last year. The one that I'm focusing on today is this export to FE CashCalc. So if I click that, we have the option now to choose either a linear return rate, an asset allocation, or send both over. I am going to send both and create that template. Now that we've sent that over, we can go back into CashCalc and it's going to take us exactly where we need to be. We can go into our portfolio tab and it should be at the top. It's the last one that was sent over. So if I click into Otis Smith here, first of all, we have a linear return rate. So this has essentially looked at that portfolio's performance over the last 5 years and given me an average return rate to use, which I can apply to cash flow forecasts. So I am going to just pop in linear against the title just so I can differentiate, and we'll save those changes. If I go over to the asset allocation template, and again in the portfolios tab, top of the list, if I click into that, we now have a variable growth template. We have the asset allocation here, but we are able to export that as a variable growth template, which I'm going to do. And I will add that in as variable. We also, of course, have the asset allocation template. So if we are using the Monte Carlo simulator in either the net or the standalone tool, we can use that asset allocation against that analysis as well. So once we have that created, the benefit is when we come to doing Otis's cash flow forecast, we can apply those variable or linear rates against their pensions, ISAs, whatever it is that's invested in that portfolio. Now I have used this in a way where we've dragged that portfolio valuation from the back office and pushed it in and around that way. But if you already have your DFM portfolios, your SIP built out in your analytics account, you can just send over those portfolios and apply them to various different cash flows. The other use case for this integration that we have, I have another client here, Claire Coleman. Claire has just completed an attitude to risk questionnaire. It is ready for review. So if I click into that, they are a moderate investor based on the results. So I just need to lock those results in at the bottom here. So that is an EV3 and they are a medium term investor. I can save and proceed. And if I go back now to the ATRQ tab, under actions, I'm able to export this to analytics. So I appreciate we have this functionality of sending an attitude to risk questionnaire via the investment planner of analytics. But if you rather a client perform the ATRQ exercise during the onboarding process whilst in CashCalc, filling out a fact find, looking at any documents that you've sent over, etc., then you can have that same ATRQ completed via CashCalc by the client or by yourself with the client in the room. And you can then send that to the investment planner so you don't have to duplicate that work. So if I create a new client in analytics, this is going to be Claire Seeds SIP. We can export that over. It'll open up in the investment planner, and providing you've done all of that portfolio linking in the investment planner at the very start of the process, you'll be able to make selections on suitable portfolios, and it's all sort of linked up and you haven't had to sort of redo anything. There we go. We can go into FE Analytics, takes us straight to the investment planner. And then not only do you have access to a series of different reports, possibility of losses, once you've made your actual portfolio selection, you can again go into the report center and build out a nice report to send off to client. But you can also send that portfolio to CashCalc for use against cash flow forecasts. So let's say we're going to make this selection. We can confirm that selection. And complete the plan. And at this stage, you'll be able to access those reports I mentioned, as well as export the portfolio to FE CashCalc in the exact same way we did for the other client, Otis's portfolio. So we're going to close that off for now, go back into CashCalc, and I'm going to show some of the features that have gone live in the Gross Cashflow Modeler. This particular client we're looking at is called Mary, and I do have a base forecast that I've created. And as I say, we're going to go through each of the different features, and I'll show you how to best use those. So a bit of information about this client. They are 50 years old. They're approaching retirement. They have some cash, bonds. There's a lot that we're going to be adding in, but we're going to do it sort of feature by feature. But they have some ISAs. They do have a pension that is at the moment split across 3 different pensions, and we're thinking about consolidating those. They have a good paying job, and they are still contributing into their pension. So we'll start off with that salary. So if I go into my incomes and add an income, unlike the net modeler where you just need the name of the income and some details as to how much it is and when it starts and finishes, we do need a bit more information when adding incomes in the gross cash flow modeler. In this case, we are talking about the client's salary. They have a gross salary of 80,000 per annum. It is an employed salary. If it was a dividend or they were a company director, for example, you can add that in at this stage as well. But it's £80,000 per year. There are no bonuses, but again, we can add those in, benefits in kind as well. And the system will automatically assume that this is probably going to end at the point of retirement. Now, the new features that we've recently added are in relation to salary sacrifice. So I am going to click to include contributions from the salary. We are going to send this to the client's workplace pension via salary sacrifice. And the client's very good. She does contribute 10% of her salary into that. You are at this stage also able to include the national insurance savings if the employer does that. In this case, they don't, so I am going to untoggle that. But the client's employer does match her contributions all the way up to 10%. So we'll add that in as well. In adding that salary, what we've now done, if I hop over to contributions, the system has automatically generated these pension contributions. So we've got record of them here. But if I also go over to the yearly breakdown and click into next year, for example, we've also adjusted the taxable salary, the taxable income. We can also see under the income section here which portions of that salary is going into the different tax bands. And if I click into liquid assets and have a look at this the pension, we can also see here both the workplace pension, employee and employer portion, the amount of that going in, as well as the effective charges, inflation, etc. So that is the first feature I wanted to show. The next one I'm going to show is chargeable gains on investment bonds. If we go into our savings and investments and add a savings pot, we'll just call this bonds for now. And these are onshore bonds. In this case, the original investment was £5,000 and that was split across 10 policies. It is 10 years old, so let's just pop 15 there. And the starting pot value, which is the value of the pot today, is 8,500. You can see we then ask for details of any previous withdrawals. So in the year, let's say 2021, the client took out 1,000, and that you can choose between a regular, full encashment or partial across all policies. In this case, I'm going to click regular. And we can also put in the details of any previous top-ups. So back in 2017-18, this client topped up £2,000. Under the investment return rate, you have the option to either choose input, which is where you would just put a linear return figure in, or you can choose a template. And this portfolios tab is where you would see information about the portfolios that you've dragged in from analytics. But in this case, I'm going to pop in a 4% linear return on that. So what the system is then going to do, it is going to treat the top slice in relief. So if we run a withdrawal later on in the future, which I am going to add in now, Under the withdrawals tab, we want to withdraw from the bond. Type here, I'm going to choose a partial encashment across all policies for the amount of £5,000. And we'll pop it as a one-off. It's automatically assuming that it is a one-off, and I'll pop that at age 60. And I do want that to adjust between now and 10 years in the future for inflation, so that's already toggled on for me. Now if I hop over next to our yearly breakdown and go to the money in, we are looking for age 60. We do also have a little insight tag that's come up. So if I click into there, we've got that information there. As we build this forecast out, we're going to come back to this page. Everything else that goes on is going to impact it, and we'll be able to see the taxation on this bond withdrawal later on. So bear with me, we'll come back to it, and it'll look a bit different when we look back at the end. Okay, so we're going back to our inputs. The next feature I'm going to show is in relation to interest on savings accounts. So again, I need to add another pot. I am just going to add a cash savings pot. And this currently has £15,000. Again, I'll stick with a 4% linear return. And at the bottom here, we have the inputs for interest. I'm going to again match that to 4%, and I want this reinvested. So if I add that savings pot, we've got more contributions. So the contributed, or the 4% interest being reinvested, is now displayed as a contribution going in back into that cash saver. And if I go to the yearly breakdown and look at next year, for example, in this case, the client is a higher rate taxpayer, so we have adjusted that personal savings allowance down to £500, and everything above that is being taxed at 40% in this particular case for the client, and that's all visible here. So the next feature is our capital gains on GIAs. So in this case, I'm going to do it slightly different and assume that the client is actually thinking about selling her house. She's going to make quite a large lump of money in a few years' time on the proceeds of that house sale when she downsizes. So to build this out, I'm going to add an event on the timeline to start us off. And I'll call this downsizing. I'm then going to create the pot. Tag it as a GIA, and I will put that the original investment is 0, and at the moment there is also nothing in that pot right now. I'm going to go with a variable return on this. When the money does come in, it's going to be invested, and I'll just stick that in as a cautious benchmark for now. And we can add that. Now, because the sale of the property is not due to happen for a couple of years, the method that I'm showing now, it can be used for any circumstance where a client is going to have a large injection of capital, but not yet. So we've set the pot up empty at the start of the forecast, and if I go to contributions and add a contribution to that pot, It is an external contribution, i.e. it is not coming from the client's current account. So this personal contribution is essentially money from the current account going into a pot. In this case, it's outside of that. And let's say this property is going to give her, let's say, 250,000 as a one-off. And because I added that event on the timeline, I can now link this contribution to that event. So if the property sale happens sooner or later, we don't have to worry about going in and changing when this contribution happens. We can just move the event up and down the timeline to see the effects of it happening at different periods. So we'll add that in. The other thing I'm going to do now is just set a pot liquidation order. So in this case, I've got this GIA right at the bottom of the list. I'm just going to pop it above the bonds and the cash, but I will keep, I'll also put the pension down as well, but I will keep the ISA above that. That'll be the first to use any shortfall. So if I hop over now to the actual cash flow forecast, what we have is this first forecast here is showing us each of the different savings pots. Each different colour represents a different one of the pots. And if I hide them all and just pop that GIA on, you can see it doesn't exist in the first 3 years of the forecast. And then the first year following age 52, this pot sort of jumps out. If I hop over to the money in, money out chart, later on in the forecast, where this GIA is being used to cover a shortfall, it's this blue one here, DMB. We do love an acronym in financial services, but that is deficit met by. So in the first few years, deficit is met by our legal and general ISA, and then we have deficit met by this GIA. If I go to my taxes chart, later on, we've got this capital gains tax payable where the GIA is being used. And then in red and blue, we also have our income tax and national insurance. We'll also be able to see details of this later on. Again, we've highlighted with, if I highlight over there, we've got an insight tag. And this is in relation to the ad hoc withdrawal from the GIA. But here we are. We've got the annual exempt amount, and then we've got the basic rate going on. The system would also tax the GIA if you were to make planned withdrawals. So if rather than just allowing the GIA to be used to cover a shortfall, you've actually gone in and specified during XYZ years, the client will be taking £7,000 out of this GIA, the system is going to tax it in the same way as well. Excellent. So we're going over to the pensions sections now. So we've got two features to show around pensions. One of them is fairly quick. If I go into add a DC pension, we have a tick box at the bottom here for an inherited pension. So this is really just going to give you the functionality to tell the system, yes, this is a pension, but it is not taxable. So prior to this feature going live, I've spoken with advisors that would split out pensions to have the taxable portion in one pot. Maybe if it's a DB and a client has taken the taxable portion and you still wanted to say that it was the pension, that's you can add that now without having to add it as a cash pot. So that's the first one. The other one is really related to transfers. So in this case, I am building it out like a pension consolidation exercise. So I'm going to add in pension one of a the value of, let's say it's a little one from years ago, and let's put 3.9% there, add that in. I'll add a second pension 2. And let's add a fourth one, why not? Pension 3 at, let's say, £26,000. Excellent. So this new feature, we've got a tab along the left hand side for transfers, and there's a couple of different use cases for this. I've chosen to show it as a pension consolidation exercise, but other really good use cases would be bed and pension, bed and ISA, spousal transfers if you've got money moving between joint clients. But if I go over to pension transfers and click to add the transfer, the first selection you need to make is where the pension is being transferred from, in this case pension 1. We will be transferring this to the current workplace pension, so the idea is let's get it all into the one that she's still actively contributing into, and hopefully we'll see some better results as a result of that. And let's call this pension consolidation. I'm going to just move 100%, and that will be a one-off, and let's say we're thinking of doing this next year. Another thing I will mention for this transfer feature in particular is we do have advanced drop downs in a lot of these features. I definitely have a look at them. I think especially for this transfer feature it is quite important. The first one, transfer before planned withdrawals, I think this really lends itself to if you're doing a bed and pension, bed and ISA exercise. If a pot is also being withdrawn from, and let's say we've got a client taking 4% from their GIA or from their ISA, they're taking 4% from their ISA to live off, and they're putting money from their GIA into it. Do you want their 4% to be 4% of the ISA value before the transfer happens in that year or after? So you have that as a feature just to bear in mind. And the other one is whether or not it's tax exempt, and this is going to be particularly useful for this pension one. It absolutely is tax exempt. The way the system treats this in the background is essentially a withdrawal from one pot and a contribution into the other. So if with a pension consolidation exercise, we don't want that to capture the income tax on withdrawing a large lump and putting it back in. So we'll add that transfer. Now, possibly my favourite part of this feature is it didn't really take long for me to build that, but because we've got 3 pensions that need consolidating into one, I can just hit clone. It'll remember everything that we've just input. The only change I'm making is we're doing this for the second pension now. So we'll add that. And of course I need to do it for pension number 3 as well. So it's really, really quick to build that out. And again, I think for your bed and ISA, bed and pensions, it's this cloning feature will save a lot of time and a lot of manual building. Okay, so if I hop over to the cash flow tab now, just so we can actually see the pension, what's going on there. Let's unhide all of these. There we go. If I just hide all of my cash pots so we can just focus on these pensions and dig deeper into them. What we have now at the very start for the first 2 years, we can see 4 different pension tabs. And these are all the different pensions that are not consolidated. And then from the year where the transfer happens, from the next full year onwards, we just have the one pension consolidated. There will also be details of this you'll be able to see some of the movements. So we've got pension consolidation, we've got this happening. So this is money coming in, i.e. coming out of the pension before it's recontributed into the other pot. Now, if we didn't toggle on that this was tax exempt, we would essentially see income tax being captured on all of these pension consolidation transfers. Okay, so that is the building process for all of these new features that have gone live. Now that they are all live, they're going to be interacting with each other in maybe slightly a different way. So we'll just have another look in this yearly breakdown and see some of the changes. So here we have in this year, this is related to the bond. So the insight is a withdrawal from a bond has been made. Check the chargeable gain tax liability. So if I come to my liquid assets here, come down to the bond. So in this case, we haven't. I think maybe I need to make the bond withdrawal slightly larger for the chargeable event to kick in. Maybe, I don't know. I think I've entered it in a bit, maybe not quite 100%. But you'll have details as to the bond transfer, the bond withdrawal. We'll also be able to see that in the money in part, and later on we then have our withdrawal from the GIA. And if we go to the cash flow model and hide all and show them all, using all of those features, it's quite a busy forecast. I appreciate that. It had to be in order for me to show every feature. But we have the taxes that are captured, the pot value of each of the pots going through the forecast, as well as our money in, money out chart. And here we have these pension consolidations there. One very small last feature I'd like to mention, if I go over to inputs and timeline and my assumptions tab, the system by default has always assumed if we have surplus income, it should be saved. So oftentimes you might have a forecast where a client has a current account that is just accruing and accruing and accruing. And if you look at their money in, money out chart, it's likely that their income surpasses their expenditure line. Now, we've made a slight tweak to how we treat that in CashCalc. We still do typically assume that surplus income is saved. However, the settings and assumptions for that are now no longer hidden behind a quick add button. It is front and center here. And we can toggle on surplus income to save. I want 0% of my income saved. But if we did want to save some of it, let's put that there. We can now choose which pot we want to save that into. Historically, it only ever saved in the current account, but you can now choose. So a few things it'll do based on the choice you make in this drop down. If you are contributing into an ISA and it is above the threshold for a standard ISA contribution in 1 year, i.e. above £20,000, the system will flag that to you. If you are contributing it to a pension, any surplus income, it will assume that it is a personal contribution to a pension and automatically apply tax relief on those contributions. Excellent. So I'm going to take a breath and have some water, and then I'll open up the chat box and see if we've had many questions. Bear with me. Okay. Okay, so we've got a question about the Monte Carlo. So yeah, I think it has already been answered, but I may as well mention it while we're here. It is in the roadmap. So if we go over to stress testing here and Monte Carlo, we've got Monte Carlo simulations coming soon. So this feature is available elsewhere in the system. You can access it via the standalone tool if we go to Tools and draw down Monte Carlo Simulator. We've got it here. And you can also access it via the net cash flow modeler. It absolutely is in the roadmap to add, but there's been so many other developments that we've prioritised just based on feedback, salary sacrifice, all of these ones I've just shown today. Basically, they've been the priority as well as integrating analytics and CashCalc. But it is in the roadmap, and we will have it. Let me check if we've got any other questions. There's a question about tax deferred allowance. I'm going to make a note and come back to you because I've recently looked into this and I can't remember the answer. So tax deferred allowance. Bear with me on that. We'll get an answer out to you. If we already have a client who is on the net forecaster, can they be cloned across to the gross? Can they be cloned across to the gross for an annual review, or do you have to input it again? Excellent question. It does not need to be inputted again. There's a couple of steps that you need to follow to get that information across. So first of all, if we go to the client information page, because of the way I've used CashCalc, using a back office integration or perhaps had the client fill out a fact finding CashCalc, their information, their pensions, their assets, liabilities, income, expenses, all of this stuff, it sits in this client information page. And from here, we're able to click update a calculator and send it into either the net or the gross cash flow modeler. Now, there are so many different ways to use CashCalc. Very, very aware that there are some advisors that rather just build the forecast in the actual cash flow forecast itself. And if you have done that in the net modeler, you're able to get those details by clicking fetch updates, fetch from a cash flow. It will only give you the net modelers, the net forecasts that you have. So let's have a look at the net current situation. It will then show us all of this information that we've got in that net modeler. If you confirm those updates, that information will then be sitting in this client information page, and you can then update a calculator and send to gross. So it's not exactly a clone the net but make it gross. You kind of have to drag the data out of the net into the client information and then push it into the gross. But it is possible and much quicker than having to retype everything out. Okay, so we've got a question about when you pull analytics portfolios across from analytics into CashCalc, if you make changes to that portfolio on analytics or the DFM makes changes, is it automatically updated in the template? It isn't. It's not a live feed, so it changes that are made in analytics won't automatically replace an existing template. I suppose I'd be interested to, annoyingly, I can't unmute people, but I would be interested to understand sort of your thoughts on it. From the conversations I've had with advisors, I anticipate it's going to be potentially sort of a 6-month to an annual review process where you get all your portfolios into CashCalc, and then quarterly or 6-monthly they are deleted and re-dragged in based on any rebalances that have happened. There's that as a method of doing it. The other method of doing it is doing it at the point of the client's annual review. So when you come to cash flow modeling for a client next year, you delete what the template is in CashCalc and you bring that portfolio through afresh. Yeah, that's how I at the moment have from conversations that I've had. But yeah, I wish I could unmute you so we could talk about it. Excellent. This is actually the first time ever I've ran bang on to time, so I will hang around in case any more questions come through. So thank you so much for coming along this morning. I hope it was useful. Any further questions, please reach out and someone will get back, and I'll just hang around now in case there's any last minute ones. But have a lovely rest of the day and rest of the week, and yeah, take care.